Welcome to Dialogues for Change. Life is not a void to be filled. It is a plenitude to be discovered. Today, I would like to share with you some nice inspirations about Bharata Natyam. Bharata Natyam is a dance form, classical dance form from the south of India that I like very much. And in this beautiful book, Bharata Natyam on the Global Stage by O Shea, there is an exploration of the transformation of this traditional Indian art. And I think it's very interesting to explore how what we actually sometimes see as frozen old tradition, which is dating back to millennia, actually is changing, is reinventing itself, is indeed drawing on its roots, but is also becoming something new and constantly reinventing itself. Bharata Natyam, Globalization, and the Politics of Revival. Bharata Natyam transcends national and cultural boundaries, yet remains resolutely tied to them. It circulates globally, but operates as a symbol of the exotic. Performers put forth contrasting versions of the dance form in performance, even while some still describe it as part of a fixed, unbroken tradition. Dancers and promoters present the practice as high art, and performers struggle to ensure that Western contemporary dance forms make room for it on the global stage. It offers a means of identity production for diasporic communities who then take the opportunity it provides to refigure the dance form and to query their social, cultural, and political situations. How to account for such a complex situation? I suggest that explanations for these apparent contradictions lie in the form's 20th-century history, and more specifically in the period from 1923 to 1948, known as the Bharata Natyam revival. Performers, critics, and promoters brought Bharata Natyam to the urban proscenium stage, recontextualizing and renaming it. In doing so, they crafted a genealogy in which Bharata Natyam came to represent ancient tradition and critical experimentation, nationalism, regional identities, and the global transference of forms outside of geographical and cultural boundaries. In the 1920s through the 1940s, the form's continuation depended on its relationship to politics. During this period, dancers contended with political imperatives that altered the practice and the context in which it occurred. They addressed those concerns by crafting choreographic interpretations that offered varied positions on the debates of their time. Bharata Natyam's immediate predecessor was Sadir, a primarily solo dance form practiced by devadasis, courtesans affiliated with temples and courts as performers and ritual officiants. The anti-Nautch, literally anti-dance reform movement, begun in 1892, denounced the devadasis' non-domestic lifestyles as prostitution and their ritual activities as superstition, while also criticizing the ostensible lasciviousness of the dance they performed. The colonial assumption of direct rule in southern India and the resulting demise of the patronage system, as Avanti Meduri and Hari Krishnan indicate, also prompted the disintegration of the devadasi system and the practice of Sadir. The anti-Nautch reform agitations, together with changed political circumstances and economic conditions, impelled the form into obscurity. In 1927, a group of activists and art supporters formed the Madras Music Academy after they organized a music conference to accompany the first South Indian meeting of the Anti-Colonial Indian National Congress. In 1931, the tide turned for dance as the Academy's officers took interest in Sadir and included a performance by devadasis in its concert series. A better attended concert followed in 1933. By 1935, the form had begun to change hands, with middle-class Brahmin girls and women, such as Kalanidhi Narayanan, Lakshmi Shastri, and Rukmini Devi, turning to dance study and performance and thus enhancing the respectability of Bharata Natyam. The new dancers, together with critics and venue organizers, defended the formerly marginal practice by aligning it with political discourses such as nationalism and regionalism. This intersection of dance with politics worked in two ways. Political concerns validated Bharata Natyam, while the classical features of the dance form substantiated claims to political legitimacy. Bharata Natyam thus moved from the edges of South Indian cultural life to the center of its most intense social and political contentions, including those over national independence, regional identity, and caste and class status. Nonetheless, the transformation of the disreputable practice into an emblem of cultural identity remained incomplete. Performers, in response, validated the form and justified the decision to practice it through arguments that circumvene or reclaim the Devadasi legacy. The revival of Bharata Natyam therefore depended not only on politics, but also on the ability of practitioners and promoters to articulate their understanding of the dance form's history. By 1933, the Music Academy's members had renamed Sadir. It was now Bharata Natyam, an appellation that associates the form with the canonical Sanskrit aesthetic theory text, the Natya Shastra, and its author, Bharata. It is also described as an anagram of bhava, mood or emotion, raga, melody, and tala, rhythm, and is erroneously, if popularly, mistranslated as Indian dance drama. All of these associations serve to validate the dance by shifting its points of reference from a marginalized local practice to our ancient pan-Indian traditions, such as Sanskrit drama and aesthetic theory, and by invoking the aesthetic categories that support India's two classical music systems, Hindustani and Carnatic music. The revival's dancers and promoters presented concerts, lectures, and demonstrations, and built up a body of critical and scholarly writing on Bharata Natyam that addressed its formal qualities, history, and cultural significance. These histories, in turn, paralleled and supported efforts to imagine communities consisting not only of the nation, but also of the region in the urban center. The transformations that Bharata Natyam underwent in the revival also placed it within a global dance milieu. The forced transnationalism of colonialism had introduced European, universalist, post-Enlightenment values to Indian social life, which in turn prompted the reform of Indian cultural traditions and social practices. Dance and the institutions that supported it did not escape this overhaul of Indian cultural life. Rather, the performers who reconfigured Bharata Natyam in the 1930s engaged with the concerns of the colonial social reform movements of the 19th century and with the modernization of Carnatic music, a process that had begun in the 18th century but accelerated in the 19th and 20th century. Bharata Natyam also entered the urban concert stage, following a long period of Western fascination with the East, and with India in particular. This preoccupation found its expression in dance practice when, for instance, European promoters sponsored performances by Devadasis of Pondicherry in London and Paris in 1838. In the late 19th century, European and North American choreographers offered their own interpretations of Eastern themes. Through, for example, the Orientalist ballet La Bayadère, which claimed to depict the life of an Indian temple dancer, a tradition that pre-modernist interpretive dancers such as Ruth St. Dennis then brought forward into the 20th century. This Orientalist fascination focused not only on India generally, but also on its dance forms. This interest subsequently fueled the Bharata Natyam revival. St. Dennis performed Nautch dances in India in 1926 and raised the interest of her urban middle-class audiences as to the nature of the dances that inspired her interpretations. The American dancer Ragini Devi, born Easter Sherman, began her career as St. Denis-style Oriental dancer, but relocated to India in 1930 in order to train in classical Indian forms. She spent the following years performing and lecturing on the merits of India's traditional dances and participated in the Music Academy's 1933 conference. The ballerina and choreographer Anna Pavlova created a series of Oriental-themed dances and subsequently traveled to India to find the dances on which her sketches were based. She was disappointed to find the solo female forms virtually non-existent, but discovered a means of rectifying the situation when she met Rukmini Devi, a South Indian Brahmin theosophist. Pavlova's suggestion to Rukmini Devi to find her own dance form initiated a historic move when the latter returned to India and sought out Devadasi dance. Pavlova had earlier influenced the Indian modern dance forerunner, Uday Shankar, who at the time was studying art in London. Shankar's collaborations with Pavlova prompted his entry into choreography and dance performance in Europe and India. He embarked upon a project that not only sent him to Europe and North America, but also drew him back to India, where he helped spark the career of the revival-era Devadasi dancer Tanjore, Bala Saraswati. Bala Saraswati subsequently enjoyed a global reputation, finding admirers among international audiences that included pre-modern and modern dancers, such as Ted Shawn and Martha Graham. Although European and North American modernists used the images they created of the mystical East to demonstrate their own singularity, their strategies paralleled those of the Bharata Natyam revival. Pre-modern and early modern dancers alongside ballet revivalists such as Pavlova reclaimed dance that was maligned in Europe as in India as idle entertainment associated with prostitution. Bharata Natyam dancers, like Western dance modernists, strove to validate dance, describing it as a high, autonomous art that expressed creativity and engaged with serious intellectual and philosophical concerns. Dancers in India as in the West validated their performance practice by emphasizing the originality of their work, but also drawing on historical sources for their inquiries. The revival installed Bharata Natyam as an independent concert dance form. It positioned the dance practice not as ritual activity associated with temples and courts, but as an urban, global art, cross-cut by concerns of local, regional, and national identities. The legacy of this period, which established Bharata Natyam as what it is today, extended into subsequent decades. The era's complexities, investments, and contradictions inflected 20th century Bharata Natyam so that later interpretations of the form emerged out of the transformations initiated during the revival. In the pages that follow, I suggest that dances continue to contend with concerns of historicity, national identity, regionalism, gendered respectability, locality, and the transnational circulation of dance practice, while also reflecting on them differently from their early 20th century counterparts. Engagement with new historical and social contexts shifted debate in new directions, which encouraged choreographic positions on these issues to both fragment and multiply. 20th century Bharata Natyam then articulated the concerns of a complex history in which political debates played themselves out on a choreographic field. Key social and political issues faced by urban, middle-class Indians and diasporic South Asians in the 20th century expressed themselves in this performance practice. Not only did large-scale discourses inflect Bharata Natyam, but performers, in making decisions about composition, form, and the representation of the dance practice, also raised political questions alongside aesthetic ones. Such concerns overlaid dance practice but did not dictate it. This web of social contentions both informed 20th century Bharata Natyam and enabled its practitioners to represent their own views on the form and on the politics that surround it. I found this book very thought-provoking because we do have a tendency on the one hand to essentialize traditions, to approach them as if a tradition is something that was frozen in a certain form 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years back, and since then it's just copied, repeated. What this book shows on the one hand is that this is not so. Traditions do evolve, do change, do adapt. The question which we can ask is, when does a tradition stop to be a tradition and becomes something else? Well, in my point of view, that is when the principles have been either lost or have been so radically changed that you cannot really say that you're still doing the same thing. Maybe then the new tradition is based on the older tradition, but it's not the same thing anymore. It's not the same tradition. Second important thing is how not only we essentialize traditions, but how we essentialize cultures. Bharata Natyam is Indian, classical Indian, very Indian. And we forget all the other inputs, like this little passage here showed how it was also molded through, amongst others, Western influences. And so what is said here about Bharata Natyam holds true of other dance forms, holds true of yoga, if we speak in the Indian context, holds true of martial arts, and of so many other traditions. So I hope that these few reflections triggered your own thoughts and inspired you on this Sunday, 30th of March 2014. Thank you.